Today we ask, is it time to leave the European Convention on Human Rights? Well, joining us to discuss that are Sasha Deschmuke, who is the Chief Executive of Amnesty International, Stephanie Needleman, Legal Director at the legal reform charity Justice, Mark Littlewood, who is the Director of Popular Conservatism, and joining us remotely is Lara Brown, Commissioning Editor of The Spectator. Good to see you all. Thanks for joining us. Sasha, this issue of migration, of course, is a big talking point at the moment. Many people argue that the convention, as I said in the link there, obstructs the efforts to deport foreign criminals, failed asylum seekers as well. Is it time to leave the ECHR?
Well, I think there's two really important things to think about on this important question of the ECHR. One of them is to remember that this country, arguably more than any, created the ECHR, created the European Convention, was a real driving force behind it. And for all those decades since the Second World War, it's been a cornerstone of our approach to creating stability and peace in Europe. And at a time when Europe's under a great deal of threat, does the UK want to somehow pull the plug out from that? And then on migration, what I would say on that is the vast majority of migration, we have high levels of migration in the country at the moment, the vast majority is legal migration. So perhaps there's some politicians who, instead of wanting to have a debate about why they've created policies that they might think are necessary for legal migration, necessary economically, sometimes point to the convention when it's not really a big factor in migration.
Yeah, Mark, some really good points there. Firstly, this migration debate, it's being sort of muddled a bit, hasn't it? And it's quite convenient for politicians to say, well, it's this convention's fault. Well, actually, there are loads of reasons why there's high migration. And that other point about we created this, and there's so many important things that this is the cornerstone for. I mean, only a few weeks ago, the Attorney General said abandoning the convention would send an immensely damaging signal to our allies and leave us in the company, and get this, of Russia and Belarus. That feels really problematic to me.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's hysterical, to be honest. Sasha's right. We wrote this. We contributed to it. It's largely a British convention, but from way back in the 1950s. And times have changed. And there's a myriad of reasons why I think our policies on asylum seekers and immigration, legal immigration, completely different thing, are wrong. A good deal of that is that politicians have messed up badly over recent years, but a substantial element of it is our legal system blocks everything up. It is extraordinary, the sort of cases we're now hearing in British courts reliant on this human rights framework, in which people are reducing all sorts of nonsense about why they can't be deported. We had the last Conservative government, the Democratic government, trying to set up a scheme to send people to Rwanda. You can be in favour of that or against it, but I think a democratically elected government should decide, not a judiciary and a legal system. And we now have a big problem, because I think the bulk of British people are sick to the back teeth about how badly this system is operating. And although politicians shoulder some of the blame for that, the legal framework shoulders a lot too.
Steph, people will be watching at home and saying exactly that the UK Parliament should have a say on our human rights decisions, not European judges.
Yeah, absolutely. And the UK Parliament absolutely does. There's broad scope for the convention to be interpreted domestically, and indeed the Prime Minister's said that he's going to look at how that is going to be interpreted domestically. But also, let's be honest about the contribution that the convention has in relation to migration. As Sasha mentioned, obviously the vast majority is legal migration, but also the numbers that are prevented from being deported, foreign national offenders who are prevented from being deported due to the courts blocking their deportation on human rights ground, is tiny comparatively. There are more lottery millionaires made in the UK each year than there are foreign national offenders whose deportation is blocked on human rights grounds by the court.
Yeah. So, Laura, what was that? More millionaires made annually through the lottery than these cases that we're talking about. Are we just conflating this situation where we're saying, oh, well, foreign criminals are unable to be deported because of it? It's actually such a small thing. Why would we want to get rid of this convention because of that?
I think there's two things here. The first is the ECHR is often focused on with regard to deportation and migration. That's an important aspect, but it's not the only part of policy the ECHR controls. So I think a very interesting case is the Swiss case from last year, where the Strasbourg court found against the Swiss government and found they weren't taking sufficient action to control climate change. And that under the right to a private and family life, you have a right not to be severely affected by climate change. So it's not just migration where domestic policy is controlled by a Strasbourg court. We are now prepared to have certain climate change regulations and sort of net zero goals because of the Strasbourg court. And I think that's an important aspect of this debate. But the second point on the numbers, they are very small. These cases are very, very expensive for the taxpayer. They take a long time and they gum up the system. So even a small number of cases is very harmful. And the second is that these cases concern some of the people we most want to remove from this country. If you look at the people who have managed to make successful claims with the ECHR, you're looking at paedophiles, you're looking at rapists, you're looking at people involved in the Rochdale grooming gang cases. And that goes part and parcel with the legislation, because these cases are often made on Article 3, prohibition from torture. And one of the most common defences is, I can't be deported because my crimes in this country have been so bad that I might face hostility from my government in my country of origin. And therefore, where we see these cases, we're looking at people we really want to remove from this country to protect the rights of women and girls quite often. And that's why I think the numbers argument isn't that strong.
OK, I mean, so we're talking about people we don't
Can I come in
this
on the
country,
women
surely?
and girls point? Because actually the convention, Laura's absolutely right, the convention is about much more than just migration. The convention protects the rights of everyday people across the UK on a daily basis, and that includes victims of women and girls who are victims of sexual abuse and sexual violence. There was a claim brought by two of the victims of the John War boys. I don't know if you remember him, Black Cab rapists, but that established that that the police have to conduct proper, competent investigations into allegations of sexual assault. The convention has so many benefits beyond migration.
But Sasha, can you just respond to that point that Laura makes about really bad people? We're talking about, she mentioned some people who've done some bad stuff. Why are we protecting them? Why are we not deporting these people? That's what so many people at home would be saying that.
Well, the European Convention on Human Rights...
Oh, I know why we're not, because of the European Convention on Human Rights. But why is that right?
The European Convention on Human Rights has protected the families who are victims in the Hillsborough disaster. The European Convention on Human Rights established freedom of expression in the press, something that people in your own profession think are incredibly important. European Convention on Human Rights established that a child that's born in a family out of wedlock has the same rights as another child. The fundamental principle of human rights is that all of us can access those rights. Even sometimes there are bad people who have done bad things where it's right for people to step in and say, no, government doesn't have an untrammeled power on them. One thing I would say in this debate, we've had quite a lot of experience in the last few years of politicians saying, don't worry, we can leave European conventions, we can leave international structures. Don't worry, everything you like will survive, and it'll just be a few things that get better. I'll just ask people, just look back on recent experience. Is it really true that you can say that when politicians have promised, we'll leave something, don't worry, it won't have any negative impact, we'll protect everything, that's really what they've delivered? Because it seems that they're promising that again.
I think most of us, probably understand, get what you're referring to. So there are lots of really good things in the convention. I mean, we're talking about preventing slavery and forced labour. It protects the right to liberty, protects the right to freedom of thought. I mean, these are really important things.
Sure.
Freedom of religion. So what is it in there that do you not think some people don't have those things? They shouldn't have those things.
This is the wrong way of looking at it. The idea that if we withdrew from this international convention, all of those things would suddenly disappear from Britain. This is the only thing holding us back from being against freedom and pro-slavery. I think it's actually quite offensive to the British people. I've got every confidence that the British people in democratic elections will elect humane and sensible politicians. They won't always get it right, but that's the way to decide it. And my view would be, since we enshrined this in English law in the 1998 Human Rights Act, do we really think freedom has improved markedly since 1998 in Britain? I'm not so sure it has. I think it's gone backwards in a number of ways.
I mean,
well,
that's a good point.
I actually agree with Mark. I've got a lot of confidence in the humanity of the British people. But then this, again, I think, remember one key element of why this country helped to create this convention and expand it across the whole of Europe after the fall of the Berlin Wall and the end of the Cold War was actually to create strength when any countries, including our own, are threatened by autocrats, and some of those countries on the eastern side of Europe. So I worry that if Britain were to pull this key brick out of the convention, the person who'd most be rubbing his hands would be President Putin.
Yeah. Lara, I talked earlier on, I think I asked you, Mark, didn't I, said about us being in the company of Russia and Belarus, as was claimed by the Attorney General a few weeks ago. What would it do for our reputation as a nation in the world, and as a major nation in the world, if we were to leave the convention?
I think to start off, it's important to recognise that the convention has radically changed since 1951. Strasbourg treat it as what they call a living instrument, which means they can regularly reinterpret articles and alter things. And therefore, I wonder about that argument. But on this reputation point, Britain has been one of the strictest adherents to the ECHR since it was created, and where a lot of other countries have just ignored it. France are regularly sanctioned by Strasbourg for deporting criminals they weren't meant to or not following things, and we don't do that. We have it in domestic law. Our courts are required to follow that. But I think to that extent, we've allowed ourselves to be taken for fools. We've allowed ourselves to operate under a system which is stricter than anything anyone else in Europe is experiencing. Reputationally, I think the important thing is that the people in Britain have human rights. We have gold standard legislation like the Equality Act designed to do that. I'm not proposing that we leave the ECHR and then we do away with all these very important principles like freedom from slavery, liberty, right to a fair trial. I'm proposing that, we do that domestically. And I don't think there'd be a reputational harm for doing human rights.
Okay, Lara, let's just get a response to that.
But let's be honest, Mark and Lara, there's the reason that you're advocating for withdrawing from the convention is not to then replicate that exactly in domestic law. It's so that governments can pick and choose what rights that they want to apply, and they can pick and choose who those rights should apply to.
That's exactly right.
So you're saying, for example, a two-tier system?
Well, I mean, for example, we do operate that. On Ukraine, we decided we're going to have a special scheme to let Ukrainians in. We decided that. Our parliament decided that. That's a two-tier system, only applied to Ukrainians. I want that flexibility to exist at governmental and parliamentary level. Yes.
The ECHR provides a baseline of human rights that are applicable to everybody, and I think it's a really dangerous path if you're going to start going down picking and choosing exactly who they apply to. Ultimately, the ECHR provides a check on state power and provides people with the tools to hold the state to account. I mean, would you want a government introducing national ID cards without the right to privacy that is enshrined in the Convention?
Well, I think you need a democratic parliament to decide these things. And there's a danger at the moment that on big issues like immigration, asylum, ID cards, we don't have a government or a parliament that can decide these things, because there'll be arguments on the floor of the House of Commons and a vote amongst people we've elected, and it gets struck down in court. Now, do we want to live in a democracy or a system where the judiciary and human rights lawyers wield all the power? I prefer the risk of living in a democracy and trusting the goodwill and common sense of the British people. Much prefer it.
I don't know whether we should leave the convention, but we need to leave this debate because we are out of time.